Welcome to our Savvy series. I'm Catherine Magana here with Rachel Ivanovich. And today we're going to have a discussion on inherited IRAs. And there's a lot of different rules and moving parts, and it can cost you tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars if you make the wrong move. So today we're going to educate and share some ideas. And once again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. It really depends on each individual situation. But we definitely wanted to make sure that you feel confident and are knowledgeable about some of the different options that you have. And once again, there's a lot of different rules and distributions, and depending if you're married or not married or where the money's coming from. So obviously there's a lot to discuss, and we've had a lot of conversations with clients and prospective clients over those last few months. And so we're definitely seeing firsthand how important these decisions are.
Absolutely, because like you said, it could be a spousal IRA or a non-spousal option. So you want to make sure that you know what your options are if you're inheriting an IRA from a spouse, or if you're inheriting it from a parent or a brother and sister, because the distribution rules are different.
And depending on the age of the parent or the spouse, and so there's obviously some things to consider. So when a woman loses a spouse, she's suddenly forced into making some big decisions. And obviously, last week we were talking about you can take it slow and some things that you have to work on right away. But one of the things that comes up is there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of, things that have to be done. You're getting calls from probably everywhere. And so when you hear somebody that says, oh, just roll over, and don't really look at all that.
That's when you have to take a time out.
Yes. It's like, well, hold on. It sounds easy, but the reality is let's look to see what's best.
Well, and you're dealing with grief oftentimes too. And so you're overwhelmed with emotions, and you want to make sure that you are making the right decision for you and for your finances, because everyone's situation is different.
Correct. So we recently had a woman that we're talking to, and she doesn't have accounts with us here, but she came to us, and we've been kind of walking her through and educating her a little bit. And the financial institution she was going with, they just basically said, here's the information. You can do an inherited IRA or a spousal IRA.
She was so confused.
And so she didn't understand what the options are or why.
Well, the paperwork, they're pages and pages, and it's like not all of it may pertain to you.
Yeah, and it wasn't filled out. And so it's like she was just a little overwhelmed. And so we really had to take a step back and just kind of say, educate on what's best and why for her situation. But I think that happens sometimes. Like if you don't have somebody that's in your corner working with you, you just get, here are your options. And then you're lost in not knowing what's the best option. And we actually had a client, I think we shared this in the past, a few years ago, that came to us. A family member had passed away, and there was an old 401k or retirement plan, and they didn't realize that they could have rolled it to an inherited IRA, and they took a distribution, but they came to us. They came to us afterwards, and it's like, oh man. So once again, I think sometimes you get overwhelmed, and just making sure you're getting educated and know what's best for you in your situation.
So maybe we start with spousal versus non-spousal IRAs and what the rules are there. And so understanding that the rules are different depending on who you are. Yeah. So if you're a spouse, you definitely have more flexibility than everybody else. Mm-hmm. But if you're an adult child or some sort of other heir, the rules are tighter and different. So let's start with widows.
Yeah, so basically if you're the surviving spouse, you have the option of moving it to an IRA, so doing a rollover.
Your own IRA.
Your own IRA. You have the option of doing an inherited IRA. So what that means is you're basically moving it from the IRA to an inherited IRA for your benefit. But at that point, then there's some rules that are involved with the Secure Act and the 10-year rule. So those, at that point, you have to
And that's what that one client that came to us this last week was like. She was like, do I take it to my own? Do I roll it to an inherited? And so
or you can do a combination. So it's just kind of looking at why and what are your
what's
needs.
Best.
And then if you're under the age 59 and a half, well, maybe it does make sense to do an inherited IRA for yourself instead of the spousal. And so it just depends.
Because if you're under 59 and a half, you can't take distributions out of that under certain circumstances. So you definitely want to make sure that you're talking correctly. So if you roll it into your own IRA too soon, this flexibility, it disappears if you're under the 59 and a half versus an inherited.
Yeah, and then, or it may make sense to do the rollover to your own IRA, and then if you can defer and don't need the money, and you can let it grow, and then take it later when you need the required minimum distributions or after age 59 and a half. So there's, once again, even though ideally, yes, having that option of doing the rollover, but once again, you have to look at.
But if you're under 59 and a half and you move it to your own, you can't take the money out without the penalty.
Correct. So you may want to do a combination or look at what those values are there.
And if your spouse was already taking RMDs and was older than you and hadn't taken that required minimum for the year, you have to make sure you take that
before you do that.
Before the end of the year.
Correct. So once again, a little more detail, but happy to walk that through that with you.
So you mentioned the 10-year rule.
Yes.
And so let's talk about that a little bit.
So if you are a non-spouse, and so say your parents or somebody passed away and you're inheriting some money, then as long as you're not a minor, because there's a whole nother set of rules with that, which we won't go over today. But if you have a parent or a family member that left you an IRA, so now you're a non-spouse beneficiary, then at that point you then would move money to an inherited IRA. And then you would now, at that time, now you have the 10-year rule, which means you have to take money out within 10 years. Like you mentioned earlier, if the decedent was of RMD age or age 73 or older and taking required minimum distributions out, then you would have to take required minimum distributions out, even though that 10-year rule applies. So there's a little nuances, but once again, that's something that you want to look at and consider. And then there's also the other thing you have to consider is it IRA money or is it Roth money? And then kind of same thing.
Because Roth money is not taxable.
Correct. But then you would, and so you may perhaps want to potentially keep some of that money in to grow tax deferred and come out tax free as long as, once again, more rules. 5-year rule was in place.
Yeah.
So,
and who knows, they may change the rules again, but for right now, this is what we've got.
And the 5 rule, what that meant is that the decedent had to open the account and had it open for 5 years. And then potentially there could, if they were required minimum distribution age, you may have to take a little bit out each year. So we're actually working with a client right now. Her mom passed away in the fall, and so she has inherited IRAs, inherited Roth, and everything's all over the place. And so we were looking at consolidating and kind of getting an idea of where she's at overall, because she will need to be taking some money out because her mom was of retirement age or RMD age. So with that, then once again, you have to look at, is it taxable, non-taxable? And then with that situation, we're actually looking at some planning because there's some home equity lines and things that we want to pay off. So there's a little bit of strategy behind that. Like I said, there's a lot of things that go along with.
And taxes comes into play too. And I just wanted to mention that because especially with that 10-year rule, there used to be something called, the stretch?
Yes, where you could do it over your life expectancy in the past.
If you inherited an IRA, you could stretch it out over your lifetime. Yeah. And so the tax planning really it's key if you inherit an IRA, because if you take the required minimum, but that at the end of the 10 years, there's still money left in there, and you have to take a big balance in a year where your income's high. So you may want to make sure you're working with your advisors so that you're planning ahead for taxes.
Well, you make a good point is we're talking about if you're inheriting money now and something happens, but there are also some that are grandfathered in where they do get to stretch that over. So even though rules change, you have to kind of figure out where you lie.
And I think until the 10-year rule was enacted, a lot of people would leave minors and or their children that leave the IRA not knowing or thinking maybe that they could stretch it out over their lifetime, but now these different rules apply. So maybe you're thinking about giving money to charity, maybe you're thinking about make sure you're talking with your advisors so that an IRA, if you give it to charity and you leave your kids some sort of other assets like stock, which would get a stepped up basis, your kids don't have to pay taxes, and the nonprofit won't be taxed on the IRA anyway because they're nonprofits. So definitely be thinking about that as well. Yeah.
So as we're talking about inherited IRAs, and potentially if you are taking some money, whether it be IRAs or inherited IRAs, one of the things that comes up a lot is that you do have to pay income on a tax on some of that money if it's IRA versus Roth, because it did come in pre-tax and now gets added on to your income. So there are the federal, state tax consequences.
Yes.
And then you have to look at how much are you taking and how does that affect some other tax planning.
For instance, Medicare.
Yep.
So if you are within the window of, 2 years of taking Medicare, you need to be, planning ahead because there is something called a 2-year look-back rule for the income-related monthly adjustment amount, or IRMAA. And so we just want to make sure that you're taking that into consideration too, because these big IRA withdrawals doesn't just mean more taxes. It could also mean higher Medicare premiums. And as your income goes up and you add those required minimum distributions or the IRA distributions to your income, if you were receiving Social Security, more of your Social Security might be taxed as well. So there's a lot that goes together. You just have to be looking at all the different pieces.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings up, we're currently working with a client. They inherited some money. He had a family member that passed away, and he ended up getting an IRA and a Roth. And so what we're looking at is, once again, spreading out over 10 years when to take that. But in addition to that, they're kind of in the sweet spot where their income has shifted a little bit and there's potential. They have a lot of money in 401ks and IRAs. And the IRA portion, we're considering doing some partial Roth conversions, looking at, once again, the inherited IRA, the partial conversions. And so, and they're below the Medicare age. There's a little bit of planning that can take place. So those are the types of conversations and things that we look at. And so it's interesting. There's a lot of moving parts, but everybody's situation is different. And obviously, it's not a one-size-fits-all.
That's right at all. We have to look at the big picture and not just at the IRA statement itself. That's why we do planning.
So I know we went over kind of a lot. Once again,
and it sounds complicated, but you don't have to do it by yourself.
Exactly. And having a plan and seeing how this all works together, we're happy to be a resource for you. And so if you take away anything, just remember, don't rush.
Don't rush, especially if you're grieving, because you need to take time to pause and get advice and just take a deep breath before you make any big decisions.
And obviously look at kind of withdrawals, what's the impact.
Don't automatically roll it over.
It's like just see what's best for you and why. Right. And then I think, with planning and kind of looking at overall, where is everything? And once again, we had a client, she had stuff everywhere and it was very overwhelming. And so kind of helping organize and consolidate. And then going forward, making sure you're taking the money out from different places that need to be taken out and really coordinating some of those distributions.
And we actually created a simple checklist to help you think things through and help you make these decisions before you sign any paperwork. So it is in the show notes.
Perfect. And so at this time, if you'd like to give us a call, we're happy to speak with you about your own situation. You can reach us at 760-692-5700. But before we wrap up, we're really excited. We do have a workshop coming up. It's called Her Financial Year. So that's coming up on February 25th at 4:30. We're going to be having it at the Carlsbad Chamber of Commerce. And
it's going to be interactive, and we're just hoping to build a community of like-minded women who want to share and learn about wealth and investing,
core values. And we're going to do a little activity together. So we'll definitely do a kind of financial vision board with you. So we're
a great evening.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. So if you'd like to register, you can register at savvyup.com/her financial year. So that concludes today's Savvy series, and we want to thank you for joining us today and getting savvy about your finances. And remember to savvy up. Please stay tuned for important disclosures. The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Any past performance discussed during this program is no guarantee of future results, and the indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. As always, please remember investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional. Savvy Woman Wealth Management is a registered investment advisor with the SEC.